This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian makes software that helps you and your team get more done, faster, and better. Jira helps you manage the tasks that make up your project. Confluence helps your team work on those projects without spinning their wheels or overlapping their efforts. HipChat keeps your team in touch with each other by audio and video chat, no matter where they are, no matter what device they choose to communicate on. Bitbucket helps the team collaborate on the code that makes up your project so that you get to the finish line faster and easier. Your team needs these products to be competitive and stay competitive in an increasingly competitive market. At WWDC this year, I was surprised to find out just how often the subject of project and team management came up, and how often at least one of Atlassian's products were mentioned. Visit Atlassian.com right now to download free demos, try out the apps for yourself, and find out what Atlassian can do for you. That's Atlassian.com to learn more about Jira, Confluence, HipChat, Bitbucket, and all the Atlassian apps. The software that helps you and your team team up to create what's next. Thanks to Atlassian for their support of MacVoices. Hi, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices at WWDC and the AltConf in San Francisco. Leander Kahney's here. I only get to see you once a year, Leander, and it's usually at the AltConf.
Well, right, yeah, they don't, with Macworld not running anymore, there's not that many conferences, are there, in the city anyway, that the Mac folks turn up to.
Yeah, and you're here all the time, though, right?
Yeah, I live here. I'm based in San Francisco, yeah.
So what's new with Cult of Mac? I mean, this is a website that's been running for a while. I still see the articles. You still seem to be above water.
Right. So, yeah, I know. Thank goodness. But this year was a challenging year, actually. I mean, there was business-wise, it was a bit bumpy, and we had a couple of partners that had some challenges. So we had some problems, but. It's always been kind of, it's difficult. It's a weird time to be an independent publisher, to be honest, on the web. And a lot of the, the ways that used to rely on to make money to fund an independent publication have become more difficult, with the rise of programmatic advertising on the web. I mean, it drives prices way down. So, even if traffic goes up, revenues come down. So it feels like we've been sort of treading water. But, and it's difficult to try to get into new things. I mean, commerce obviously is a big thing on the web, and we're in a good position, I think, to try to use that as a revenue stream, by recommending products and recommending things that people should buy, and taking a first look at stuff and reviewing things, and hoping that people will buy something after they read a review on our site. Podcasting as well. I'm trying to get into podcast. I just launched a new podcast where I'm interviewing people from the Apple world. So it's going to be like a 1 hour. I've just did the first episode. But it's a 1 hour interview with people every week. Hopefully, something newsy. But I've also lined up some people that used to work for Apple, and I'm hoping to talk to them about working with Steve Jobs and working on the iPhone, working on the iPad, and things like that, and Mac OS X. So I'm hoping that that'll be interesting for people who follow the company. Like, try to dive into how the company, how they actually did things. There's this. Steve Jobs, rightly and wrongly, got a lot of the credit for everything that Apple did, but there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been told, and I think a lot of them feel that they made a contribution that hasn't really been recognized, and so I'm hoping to tap into that. But yeah, things are okay. Are you glad you asked? That was a bit TMI, I think, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Yeah, just a lot of people end up on the couch here, Leander. Before I forget it, what's the name of the podcast?
It's Cult of Mac, Kahney's Korner. So if you search for Cult of Mac or Kahney's Korner, Kahney with a K. I hate the name. My wife persuaded me to use it. She said I need to get myself out there a bit more. I'm too behind the scenes. So against my own wishes, I called it Kahney's Korner. Took her advice on that. So I just had the first episode. The first interview I did was with Ken Siegel. He was he was an ex. Advertising guy that worked for Chiat Day, and they were called back in when Jobs returned to the company in '97, and so he was the guy that named the iMac, and he also worked on the Think Different campaign and a bunch of other stuff. He actually worked with Jobs at Next as well, so he worked with him for about a dozen years. So he was an interesting interview. He's got a new book out called Think Simple. Talked to him last week. A little bit about his reminiscences about working with Jobs and working at Apple, and his new book. Yeah.
That sounds like it's something. Okay, there's one more I got to add to my list, because those are the stories you can't help but be interested in.
Right.
I mean, they're history.
Yeah, absolutely. It is history too. It is. It's totally history. But when you say that to people, it's funny. Like a lot of the interesting, a lot of there's sort of two hierarchies of people, I think, at Apple, and how you approach them really has a big effect on how much they want to talk. So for the executives and the higher ups, you say, you're part of history, you have a story to be told. That definitely appeals to them because they have an ego, and they're like, they want to have they want to. I was the one who thought of the iPhone. I was the one who did this, and I was the one who did that. So a lot of their stories are kind of the same. And I won't name any names, but some of the people that talk to the press a lot are definitely like that. But then if you talk to the engineers and the people who are further down, sort of like the rank and file staff, that is the worst thing you can say, because they're terrified. They don't want to have their name out there. They do not want to be like talking about the work they did. They're afraid of all the NDAs they sign with Apple, and they're afraid that Apple will come back and exact revenge if they talk. So you got to take a much, I found like a much more low key approach to approaching them. And you have to sort of pitch it like, on a sort of a product level, like this was are the problems. What were the problems you solved? What were the things that cropped up, and how did you get around them? And it's sort of like they're really engaged at that intellectual level, where because this is what turns them on, an engineer and a programmer, this is what they love to do, is to solve problems, and they couldn't get this to work, and how did you get that to happen? So you have to take a much more sort of low-key approach to those guys. You do not want to say that this is going to, this is part of the history. But that's the interesting thing. I mean, sorry, this was like a long digression, but it's funny, isn't it? Because, when I got into this game, it's 20 years or more now, tech was important, but it was a sideline. And with, PCs, the PC era was all about Windows and machines that you were forced to use at work, and everybody hated them. Even though they had to use a PC, they hated it. They couldn't stand it. And then Apple really, with Steve Jobs returning in '97, really reignited this crazy, massive changes in culture and the way we do, and everything now is mediated, through some kind of device, and it has affected everything. And it's a huge cultural story. I was listening to the radio the other day, and a guy was talking about the Rolling Stones in the 60s and Altamont and Woodstock, and that was the culture of those days. People lined up outside a record store to get the new Beatles album, and or they lined up. They would travel across the country to get to a concert. These days, it's for the iPhone. The new iPhone comes out, and people line up for that. It has become front and center of culture, which is fascinating. And so people who've made these. They're definitely part of history. I think it's really important. I think it's a shame that Apple is so secretive, because, it's history. It is history. These are historic products, historic changes that they've created. And I think there's a responsibility for those stories to be told.
I agree with you, because that's kind of the way I feel about sometimes this show. I'm not documenting Apple, but you're documenting the culture around Apple and the people that make it happen. Your point, though, about the PC era is I think really interesting. If you told somebody that they had to use technology the way that we all use technology now, God, there'd be an open rebellion. Yeah, they wouldn't, especially if you had to use like Windows technology. Can you imagine, remember when the first sort of Windows phones came out, and you had a little stylus, and you had to pull down a little menu. All they did was shrink that Windows interface to a smaller window. Yeah, it's, they wouldn't want it. But the changes have been momentous, I think it was difficult to. There was the Jetsons cartoon and a lot of science fiction. If you look at Blade Runner now, which I remember thinking was extraordinarily futuristic when it came out in the 80s, but I watched it the other day. I don't know why I thought of Blade Runner, or Alien, that also looked really futuristic. But you look at the technology they have, and it's so, it's like it's 70s and 80s technology that they've tried to dress up to make it look futuristic. And here we live in a much, much more futuristic world than I think anyone really imagined. With a tricorder and Star Trek and video phoning. My mom took a trip to New Zealand a couple of months ago, and she's FaceTiming me from the New Zealand airport. Is amazing quality, beautiful, super clear. She showed me around the airport. This is what it looks like, and it's so commonplace. I mean, it doesn't even really mean anything. But 4 or 5 years ago, to try and imagine that, I think you would have said, there's no way that kind of stuff is going to become, so commonplace. You can do it anywhere. You don't even have to have a Wi-Fi connection. You could be,
you could be in Yosemite, you know, or in the backcountry somewhere, you know, at Zion or whatever, in a national park, and get it. I think it's mind blowing, but it's happened so gradually. You don't really sort of appreciate that we live in this really crazy futuristic world.
Yeah, I think you're right. It kind of snuck up on all of us.
Yeah.
And if you stop and really think about what it was 5 years, 10, 15, 20 years ago, the world has been transformed right out from under us, and we were part of it, but we were kind of focused, I guess, on little bits and pieces of it.
I think it's hard to appreciate. You know, if you'd gone into a coma and you woke up now, you would have gone, "Oh my God, what happened?" You know, look at these crazy things. These are amazing. I think people are, you know, and it's funny. You know, WWDC this week, the keynote, all the complaining. They didn't get this, they didn't get that. This is rubbish. That's rubbish. Come on, I mean, like it's difficult to recapture the delight, you know, like of using I remember the iPhone being super, the iPod even as well, being super delightful, like using that little wheel and scrolling up and down, listening to the music, and you know, this just a small thing, you know, being able to take all that music and be able to have it play, and if you put it on shuffle, and sometimes it would play a song that you hadn't heard for ages, and it would just be perfect, and such an experience, you know, and the experience of using the iPhone and the touch interface. I mean, people take it for granted now, and they're like so sort of blasé about it, but it really is magical stuff. It's super magical. I'm just really excited about, you know, Siri looks really good. I'm a huge fan of the Amazon Alexa speaker at home, and all the AI stuff I think is going to be amazing. I think that's really going to sneak up on us, and that's going to be make a big change in all the interfaces, you know, being able to talk to devices. I started talking to the Apple TV a lot more than it's difficult to change your habits. You know, you're so stuck with things, and you keep on doing things the same way you've always done them. But once you, like, I try to use Siri. I have to force myself to use Siri, and it's really good for a lot of things I use it routinely for. You know, it's like setting alarms and setting timers and reminders. I sometimes use it for texting. Initiating, opening up apps and stuff like that, but you know, I really don't use it for anywhere near as many tasks. But the Apple TV, you know, the new Apple TV, the Apple TV 4, I got, you know, used to getting that to use it to rewind and fast forward and jump forward this, you know, to certain places, and that's great. It's really, really great. It's really the best way to use your TV once you get used to using it, and it actually works quite well.
Yeah. It feels, there are times, Siri to me feels like when I was first really appreciating the apps on the iPhone, that it wasn't a case of being able or not being able to do something. It was a case of remembering that you had an app to do it. And you had to train yourself to remember, oh, okay, I'm going to do this. I can do this better with this app. Yeah. And the same thing with Siri now. I can type out my message, but why wouldn't I hit the button, or better yet, maybe just tap my watch and dictate to Siri, and there it goes. You know.
Well, except when it doesn't work, you know, and then you don't trust it, and then it's like, oh, you know, you don't use it because it doesn't work perfectly.
Yeah, but it's getting better.
It is. Yeah.
You know, I'm not sure if it's learning me or if it's just learning in general, but it is. I've seen the accuracy rate go way up in the last 6-8 months.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I was, you know, when I first got the watch and Siri on the watch, I was using it a lot. I was like dictating messages. That's actually quite good because you can use it in the car. You know, my kids are texting me, my wife, where are you, what's going on, you know, and I can dictate a response on the watch. Although it's a bit dangerous because you've got to make sure that the message transcribed correctly. Yeah. That's not something sort of gibberish. Yeah. And then you have to hit, you know, OK or send or whatever it is. So it's not a good thing to do. And it's almost as bad as texting on the phone. But yeah, you know, I was using that quite a lot, but then and then I don't know. There was one day in the car, and I was trying to get it to say something, and it was messed up. And you can't correct one thing. You got to delete the whole thing and do it again. I did it again and again. I was like, okay, forget it. Drove me bonkers.
And that shows you how spoiled we are. That on the third try, it won't understand what I'm saying. So I'm just going to say the heck with it. Right. What's wrong with us?
Yeah, I know it is, but you know, it's how many? Do you remember those studies? You know, people look at their phones, you know, 120 times an hour or something. What is it? It's crazy. I mean, it mediates every single thing I do, the phone, and it's there, you know, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, and it's a blessing, but and also a little bit of a curse too. But I think the benefits definitely outweigh the demerits.
Yeah, I mean. Just all the things we wanted are here in some fashion. You know, they may not be quite the way they were envisioned back then, or we might not be quite the whole way there yet. But you feel like if you're not the whole way there, you're well on the path. And I I, for one, I don't want to go back. There's no nostalgia about certain things for me. I'm happy I don't have to do them that way anymore. Who wants to go back to a typewriter?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. There's an Apple II festival coming up. Do you know that? Kansas Fest?
Yeah.
And so we have our reporter Dave Pierini is going to go down there and hang out for a few days. And these guys, they have these all working Apple IIs, and it's fascinating because this computer, which is 40 years old now, is it?
Yeah, that's about right.
Late 70s. Yeah. So and there's a community, that still writes software for it. There's still a little bit of hardware development. There's definitely people who keep these Apple IIs running. I talked to a doctor that wrote a book last year about the history of the Apple II, and he still keeps his Apple II running, but he fires it up. He doesn't really use. He said there's. I was trying to find people who still use the Apple II. I heard a story about a New York psychotherapist that bought an Apple II back in the 70s, and he paid a lot of money to have this custom app made, some software made to run his business, and it did all the billing and kept all the records. And he just kept using it. It worked for him. It did everything he needed to do to run his psychotherapy practice with the Apple II, so he kept it running. And I heard about this in just a few years ago, maybe sort of 2010, maybe 2011. Casually from somebody, from his wife actually. His wife told me that he was still using it, and then I wanted to do a story about it. So I left it a couple of years, and then by the time I went back, he'd actually traded it in finally for an iPad. So he was actually now running. So it must have been later than that. So it was only a couple of years ago. I was amazed. This guy kept this thing running for 40 years. But then someone told me there's a whole bunch of sort of manufacturing plants and warehouses and stuff like that all over the Midwest that still run, a warehouse will be still running an Apple II, or a machine shop somewhere still has an Apple II running. And I found a few examples. I thought that was fascinating. These machines, it speaks to the longevity of something, right? And how well, how great it was. I mean, that really was a revolution, I think, then the PC, because it really brought a lot of, look at the changes it's wrought. It's been amazing, astonishing. Anyway, so the Apple II, I definitely don't want it. These guys fire them up for nostalgic reasons, but I don't want to do that. You look at those old games and all the things you used to do and the stuff we had to do to make it work. And
yeah, I mean, don't misunderstand. I think it's interesting, and there's nostalgia for maybe fond memory nostalgia, but not the kind of nostalgia I want to go back and necessarily relive that stuff when I can pull out my iPhone or pick up my iPad or sit on my 5K iMac. It's not quite the same.
Yeah, no, it isn't. A 5K iMac, right? That screen is absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, I mean, I used to use the original Mac. Back in the 80s, and I remember writing school papers on it, college papers, stay up all night, and you're just about to finish it off, and then it would crash, and you'd lose everything. I mean, that definitely happened to me a couple of times, and the frustration and the madness of that, and swapping disks in and out because it ran out of memory when you had to save something. You had to pop out the application disk and then put in your disk to save your documents, and it was... those were always really sketchy moments.
Getting that second drive was a big deal. You didn't have to do that disk shuffle anymore.
Right. Yeah, and that was 20 megabytes or something, and that seemed extremely generous, didn't it? It's how am I ever going to fill all the 20 megabytes on some old hard disk?
I've said this before. I still remember making a trip to buy a 16K RAM card for an Apple II. And now it's just, I'm almost embarrassed to tell that story. It's 16K, I don't think I have anything that small anymore.
Right. Yeah. No. It wouldn't. It's not enough to store anything, is it? I mean, and a couple of ASCII characters.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how much? A lot of apps we get these days are 60, 70, 80 megabytes for an app on your iPhone, and that's probably a fairly modest sized app, isn't it? It's not even very big.
The world has changed.
Yeah.
So where do we send folks to find the new podcast and to find you?
cultofmac.com, and the podcast is on iTunes and it's on Google Play, and I'm still trying to figure out other places to put it, but yeah, it's on iTunes. Yeah, you can easily find it on iTunes.
It's good to see you. I hope we can do it a little more often, but if not, I'll see you here next year.
Right, definitely. Yeah, I'll be here.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices at AltConference and WWDC in San Francisco. Back with more soon. Thanks for watching.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes, links to subscribe, and to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, SoundCloud, the MacVoices blog, the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, and on MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard that helps you do more with your Apple tech. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.